Welcome to AI for Good, the leading, action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies, in partnership with 50+ UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the second episode of the Quantum World Tour. So if you joined us previously, we went to Malta, and today we're going to South Africa. So if you weren't able to join our previous session, the Quantum World Tour really began with this simple idea, which was to document in public how nations are building the scaffolding of quantum ecosystems. So how does ambition translate into infrastructure and research to enterprise? So in our previous episode, Malta was really the picture of agility. So this was a small state that moved very quickly to claim relevance. South Africa tells a much different story. This is one of endurance, of cumulative investment, and of a nation that's defining progress on its own terms. So I want to start off with giving a brief overview of what the South African quantum ecosystem looks like. And this is meant to be a bird's eye view. And then we're going to move into specific remarks from our representatives from South Africa. So first and foremost, the Department of Science and Innovation launched the South African Quantum Technology Initiative. And it was not focused on the rather grand promise of building domestic quantum computers. Instead, it was focused on what does it look like to be quantum ready in a developing economy. So the answer looked like a network of 5 universities, which each led a different frontier within the quantum technology ecosystem. So computing, communications, and sensing. Together, these really formed a distributed national laboratory, but they were connected through the same intent and shared funding. So this really reflects a pragmatic approach. Rather than duplicating hardware that's already being built elsewhere, South Africa was investing in software, algorithms, and skills. So really the connective tissue of the quantum ecosystem. If we look closer at the research that's happening within South Africa, first at Wits University, the Wits Quantum Initiative has become a singular anchor of that effort. So through a partnership with IBM, Wits became the first African node on the IBM Quantum Network, which gives researchers from Johannesburg to Lagos direct access to real quantum processors. Stellenbosch University, meanwhile, has really pushed the boundaries of quantum communication. So in a 2025 project, announced earlier this year, they worked side by side with the University of Science and Technology in China and established the world's longest intercontinental quantum key distribution link. And this was a 12,900 kilometer connection between Beijing and Stellenbosch. This was both a scientific achievement, but it was also a very bold statement that the Global South is also a co-author in frontier technology. And this is very, very important. If we take a look at industry, the local ecosystem is still very early, but there are signs of activity. So much of South Africa's ecosystem really remains rooted in research institutions. It's a very large focus on academia, but we are beginning to see early commercial exploration around enabling technologies. So they have a very strong history in photonics, secure communications, as well as post-quantum cryptography. So in this sense, South Africa's industrial story is one really centered around preparation rather than proliferation. So building the capabilities, the infrastructure, and the expertise that future ventures will need to lean on. The African Quantum Consortium is headquartered in South Africa and really captures that intent. This is a group that connects researchers, investors, and policymakers from across the entire continent under a shared goal of technological sovereignty and collaborative growth. So really centered around people. Along a similar front, the South African Quantum Technology has Emerging Quantum Leaders program to place young scientists in universities, in national labs, and within industry. Parallel to that, there's also a heavy focus on inclusion. So universities that were historically excluded from high-tech research are now nodes in the national network. There are also outreach initiatives that bring researchers into classrooms. So UNESCO-supported programs in particular train and mentor African women in quantum computing. If we look forward, South Africa's quantum project is not about competing or racing with the United States or China, but it's really about ensuring that when quantum technologies mature, Africa will not just be a passive recipient of other tools, but an active participant in shaping them. And this is a vision that really values capability over spectacle, and it may even prove to be a very sustainable model. So in a field that's often very defined by competition, South Africa is focused on collaboration as a strategy, inclusion as investment, and pragmatism as a kind of courage. And before we move forward to talk more about South Africa, I really want to highlight how the tour began and what our last stop, Malta, left South Africa to consider. So when asked what advice they wanted to pass forward, Malta's panelists returned to a singular idea, that quantum does not happen in isolation. One speaker even noted that it has to be continental, top down and bottom up all at once. So that sentiment is incredibly relevant here. South Africa's strength has always been its ability to convene, to link research to the broader ecosystem, and to connect Africa's emerging quantum communities. Malta also reminds us that imitation is not necessary. Every nation has the right to bring its own flavor to the field. And South Africa's blend of academic depth and social inclusivity is precisely that, a very distinct signature. And perhaps most practical of all was their advice on people, that a quantum workforce is not limited to physicists, but requires engineers, coders, systems designers, policymakers, an entire constellation of skill sets. So we're really talking about translation over invention. That, in essence, is what binds this tour together. Nations learning not how to compete, but how to connect. And with that, welcome to the Quantum World Tour South Africa. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Andrew Forbes, Director of the South African Quantum Technology Initiative and Distinguished Professor within the School of Physics at Wits University. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, for the very kind introduction. Shall I share my slides and give an overview of the program?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hopefully everybody can see the first slide. You gave a fantastic overview of our program. I'm sure I can do less of a job, but hopefully I can give a little bit more of the strategy and the thinking that went behind the outcomes that you've just heard about. So it's called SAQT for short. It's South Africa's Quantum Technology Initiative. It was launched, well, officially we started the program around about 2018, and it was officially updated in 2021. So about 4 years ago, it was endorsed by the government. And with a little bit of seed funding that bridged the early years, we essentially had 3 years of continuous funding that came to an end in the end of March this year. So what is the strategy all about? It's about establishing quantum science as a base around the country, building critical mass. We're a very small country with a small quantum community, trying to use that critical mass to translate the good science into quantum technologies, and then use the technologies and the people to fast track a quantum industry. That's what we promised the government, that we would use taxpayers' money to show the impact that science can make on the economy of South Africa. And I think what I want to bring out, just a few points in the short time that we have, is that what we told the government is it's not really about money. I mean, money, of course, is very important, but it's really not the intervention that South Africa needed. What we needed was leadership. So we needed to have the sum greater than just the parts. And this little cartoon slide tries to capture that using communications as just an example. It's not more of the same, but rather to get the universities to develop their devices and protocols, to use the infrastructure we've got in big capacity institutions to release it for quantum tests, to get the government to be an uptaker of technology, to legislate, to create an environment to fast track this, and then having SAQT to be the means that really cohesively gives the leadership to make it a program that is more than what we could do just by ourselves. And so that's why when you look at the program, you see that there's a distribution that's very diverse, both geographically, in terms of project type, universities, institutions beyond universities, covering research to technology development to training and advocacy. And as you said, it's centered around 5 nodes around the country, and we hope to expand that in the years to come. Of course, we don't work alone, as was indicated by Malta. We're in a global world. There's no such thing as a quantum secured network in one country, but not in another. We need to work globally. And so we have many, many partners around the world. These are some of the universities and institutions that our quantum network is working with globally. And our focus is pretty narrow. We have very limited resources. We have to use them very wisely. We don't have a very big community. So it's not only financial resource, but also human capital resource. And so we've chosen very specific projects that we feel that we could make an impact on. For example, quantum metrology, sensing, and imaging, trying to harness the fact that we have got a very good metrology background and that this is an area where we could make direct relevance to industry. And in each of the slides, you can see at the top here some of the universities and the types of things that they're working on, just as examples of the projects that are ongoing. Beyond imaging and metrology and sensing, we're looking at quantum communications. There, we're trying to demonstrate to companies and particularly the financial sector in the country what quantum communication can do for you, why you should be thinking about it and perhaps investing in it, trying to have a locally deployed network with local technology, but also technology from overseas that's deployable immediately. And again, all participants from around the country trying to bring the components together to make the whole a workable solution. As you mentioned, in quantum computing, we made a strategic decision not to build a quantum computer. We simply are too far behind the game in that respect. We don't have the people to do it. And so we concentrated on quantum software for real-world applications. So working with companies and institutions that need quantum solutions that we can provide the expertise. A lot of hand-holding, essentially, to move the country forward into its quantum future. And we try to be realistic in what we sell people. We don't want to sell the hype, although there's a lot of hype around quantum science. So we try to tell them, look, quantum computers could be very useful in the future, perhaps not immediately to your organization, but treat it as a sandbox. Come and play with our help, see what it can and can't do. At the very least, you'll be a very well-informed buyer or user of future technology, but maybe you do find a niche application where you have immediate value. So it's coming. You should be ready and aware of what that means for your organization. That's really what we're trying to get across to the South African economic and commercial space. In all these projects, we have some beautiful highlights. We're probably going to hear more about them during the course of today's discussion. So I just have a few slides as examples from beautiful science, This is the satellite link between South Africa and China, so beautiful, world-class, world-leading science. To practical devices, this is a camera that was developed for quantum imaging that's very, very fast and practical in many bio and security applications. Quantum devices that are locally relevant, but internationally leading in their science. This one, for example, to detect malaria with a quantum metasurface enabled solution. And then we have, of course, the local relevance, which is to educate and make our public aware of what quantum science and technology is all about. And here you see an educational tool that is brings local languages and local characters to the fore so that we can make it relevant to the people of South Africa. In all these projects, as you said, we don't want them to be done by physicists at universities. We want a cohort of skills and capacities to be involved, and that includes industries. So here are some of the industries that we're presently working with. We have a very well-established financial sector. We'd like to see other sectors grow, but we'd like to see all of them become quantum-enabled. They don't have to be quantum experts, but they should be quantum literate and quantum enabled. If they're not using quantum, it should be a conscious decision and not something simply because they're ignorant of it. That's our strategy in SAQT. So over the last 3 years, I won't read all the numbers, but we've done tremendous good. We've made a lot of progress. You can see everything on the slide that covers technology demonstrators to students and publications. Maybe I focus just on at the bottom. You can see that we've already spun out 4 startup entities. That is phenomenal for a small country in only 3 years of limited funding. And we've had significant local investments into the program. And so on the basis of this excellent performance, the government have given us funding for the next 5 years. And so we plan to expand on our activities to start new emerging centers in quantum. We plan to take our technology demonstrations and make them fully deployed examples that go out into industry. We want our small startups to grow and become established companies. This is essentially our dream, to create a quantum workforce out of all of our fundamental university students and centers that are driving human capacity development. We want to double the industry engagement so we really can say that we're making an economic impact, and we want to double the co-investment into our program to show that we're relevant to what people are doing out there in the real world and that this is not just a pipe dream. And so we look forward to having completed 3 very successful years. We look forward now to the next 5 years. That would be the telltale time whether we really have translated our dreams into a quantum reality. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about that and the program, it's a little bit outdated now, actually, but we have a short article that summarizes where we wanted to go. And we're well on our journey, but we have a long way still to go. And to really get where we want to be, we need this global community to be working with us. So that's a very short 10-minute version of what we're trying to do in SAQT.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a great overview of a lot of the efforts that are happening in South Africa. And what really, really stands out, and what I think is essential to distill along this tour, is that there's this focus, very realistic focus. So like you said, you're dealing with limited human capital, limited financing. So South Africa really leaned into where it already has that solid foundation in metrology and sensing. And I think that's incredibly practical, so that we're not just focused on what's dazzling about quantum, not just focused on the hype, but how do you make it practical and how do you really focus on literacy and enablement? And I think that's great. So all of that being said, I'd love to now continue this conversation by broadening the lens. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to hear from a few different representatives who are each bringing their unique perspective on how South Africa can translate strategy into science, scale, and impact. So our panelists will be, again, Professor Andrew Forbes, who will also be joined by Dr. Yaseera Ismail, who is a senior lecturer within the Department of Physics at Stellenbosch University. And we will also hear from Dr. Isaac Nape, a senior lecturer within the Department of Physics at Wits University. So welcome, panelists. Now, before we get started into the broader discussion, I do want to start with a question that is essential to the tour. So if you didn't join us for Malta, this may catch you a bit off guard, and for that, we like a little bit of element of surprise. So from each of you, I'd love to hear, what do you want quantum to do for your country?
Shall I start?
Yes, whoever would like to take it first.
I would like to, in South Africa, we have a very high unemployment rates. There's a lot of people who really, I think it's the responsibility of people who can to create opportunities for people who perhaps can't. And I would really like to see that we have a new economy grown out of our quantum expertise, that we can show South Africans that we can make life better for the ordinary person and not just for the people that are receiving investment and very comfortable in their offices. I want to see a real quantum economy for the country.
I'll continue and add to that. I would also like to see the fact that quantum is not for just researchers and academics, but quantum is expansive beyond just the highly educated. Quantum should be approachable and quantum should be available for everyone, even for the layman. It shouldn't be that we in the minority make use of this amazing technology and the majority of people are left unknown, and they don't. We have to advocate for quantum enough so everyone can make use of this emerging technology.
I think from my side, I'd love to see quantum becoming the next driver of future technologies. And, seeing everyday South Africans also implementing solutions using these technologies. Much like what we're seeing with AI today, so many different people are coming with various solutions for different problems based on this one thing called AI. Hopefully, quantum also does the same thing in future.
No, that's great. Thank you, each of you, for answering that question. Andrew, I felt like that was particularly powerful. People who can, creating opportunities for people who cannot, as well as this idea that we're promoting quantum for everyone, as well as practical ways in which quantum can be enabled. So really, really great. Thank you all for answering that. And I'd love to look a little bit more into, I guess, the future. So we've spent a lot of time focused on what are the clear strengths, so leaning into metrology and sensing, as well as how the South African Quantum Technology Initiative is really coordinating national efforts. So I know, Andrew, you mentioned that there is funding secured for the next 5 years, which is incredible. I'd love to know if we're looking 5 to 10 years ahead. So outside of that 5 years of funding, what do you see as the biggest challenges for South Africa's quantum ecosystem? And this could be across the board, from talent, funding, infrastructure, et cetera. And how might they be overcome?
Although we've grown the community significantly over the last period, and hopefully we'll improve that over the next 5 years, it's still very fragile. We still have very few people at each of the centers, and were they to move on or something happen or they retire, we could see centers collapse. So we're at a very fragile stage. We need to kind of consolidate what we're doing. I think the other challenge is that in South Africa, there is a lack of awareness of quantum still. When we speak to people, they're not really sure what it is. Is it science fiction? What can it do? And getting over this barrier is very hard. We're now trying to change our strategy and work from the CEOs down rather than the techie people going up. We're trying to get it onto the strategy documents of major companies so that there's an incentive and pressure from their shareholders to actually embrace and engage with quantum. So these are challenges. It's just to penetrate with the very, very small community that we presently have. But I'm sure we can overcome it as we grow and as we mature.
Thank you. Yaseera, Isaac, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. The brain drain, I think, for me would be the biggest challenge, because you can find funding, you can find investment, you can collaborate internationally and nationally. But if you in a situation where you have a brain drain where a lot of our researchers may want to leave the country maybe one day, we need to incentivize that they stay, and we expand the network beyond the 5 core universities that are currently working on the development of quantum technology.
I also agree with Andrew and Yaseera. I think another thing to add is maybe infrastructure as well. If we could grow the infrastructure that basically supports a lot of these activities that we do, this would also be great. I mean, we have a lot of well-established labs, but the more the better, because as soon as we keep growing capacity, I mean, where do we keep these people and where do we send them after we train them? Yeah.
No, these are very important points. And I think this is something that we hear quite extensively from many different places is how do they stop, well, now that they have this research ecosystem, how do they stop the talent from leaving, and then they're not able to really focus on industry or commercialization. So this is definitely a big issue. Now, since there is such a heavy academic focus and there are a lot of universities that are contributing to research, I'm curious to hear, do these universities actively support entrepreneurship? So are there active efforts to encourage startups and spin-outs and commercialization?
Definitely, yes. I think that would be true at all South African universities. Certainly here at WITS, it's strongly encouraged. Innovation is the catchphrase of the day, I would say. And there's tremendous support for it. Everybody wants to see people start up companies, and that's what we're trying to encourage within SAQT. We're trying to make it as easy as possible and to encourage people to go with their great ideas and get it out there and try to make a difference. So we want to see much more of that, as does the government. So our Ministry of Science is called the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. So it's very important.
That's great. It's really important to have that foundational support.
Yeah, and we can even take it a step further. There's also discussions about curriculum reform and how entrepreneurship can be now an inclusiveness in curriculum. So that would then encourage startups and building an ecosystem.
Yeah, I can add to that security actually sort of pushes us to kind of drive innovation. I mean, we do produce a lot of research outputs, but I think the main thing that they look for is that there's technology transfer. And so then, I mean, once you have that, we definitely must have startups being developed. And I think our university really has a lot of support for us around that too. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love this idea of really, Yaseera, what you were saying of starting to weave in the foundation of entrepreneurship into the curriculum itself. I think this is really important, especially as we're educating engineers and future scientists, to get them to start to understand what does it look like to form their own ideas. And then once they form their own ideas, to actually pursue implementing them or building a thing. I think that's really great for the future workforce as well, to have that, to have people who are actively engaged and actively building. So great to hear about that support, and hopefully we'll start to see more startups emerge from South Africa in the coming years, especially with the additional funding. So a little bit outside of academia, I want to switch to another topic that's very top of mind, and that is security and standards. So does South Africa currently participate in any global conversations on standards or quantum diplomacy? Do they have influence or benefit from standard setting?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we sit on many international bodies. I just have been sitting on a working group. It's mostly European based. I think it's the developed countries, OECD, and essentially it's all about what should we do in planning for the future for a quantum workforce. How do you produce the right number of people with the right type of skills? And why do we sit there? Partly it's because how do we avoid the movement of people in a way that is highly disruptive to small economies or small countries? So that would be one example. BRICS, of course, is another, where we have a working group on quantum strategy trying to discuss how we could coordinate across BRICS countries. And then, of course, South Africa is hosting the G20 this year, and quantum has been very much on the agenda, discussing with many countries, what does quantum mean in a global perspective? How do we get the balance between this race to enjoy the fruits of quantum from an economic perspective, balanced with this cooperative need if we're going to really make it a globally relevant and mutually beneficial type system. So yes, there's many, many initiatives. South Africa is quite active in that realm, I would say. We are particularly interested in the quantum computing angle, which we watch very carefully. I say that because political landscapes change over time, as we've seen in recent turbulent years. Our strategy is based, as you know, as you said, on building software, which assumes that one has access to the machine. And so we are watching the world space and engaging in conversations around, is this likely to be the future? And if it were not, how could we mitigate that? So yes, there is higher level discussions, and this conversation around standardization, cooperation, and a globalization of quantum is essential to our survival, I would say.
Oh, thank you for that. I think this is a really, really interesting question in quantum, because this is a technology that, as you mentioned, does have these security implications. And so we want to strike this balance between collaboration, but also being aware that there are those other considerations. And so along those same lines, I know that South Africa is particularly very focused on quantum communications and quantum safe communications. So I'd love to hear more about efforts in QKD and post-quantum cryptography. How are those being implemented across the nation, and what sort of pilot projects? I know we briefly touched on the one with China, but I'd love to hear more.
Yaseera, this one's for you.
Yeah, so Sarah, when we started looking at quantum communication, and maybe I'll go a little bit backwards as well and start where we started off. It was a natural transition from classical optics to quantum optics for researchers on the African continent, and specifically in South Africa. We had a very strong focus in classical optics, which transitioned into quantum optics in the early 2010s. And at that time, I think the most emerging technology that was being developed was quantum key distribution. So back in 2010, when we started working on tabletop experiments, we said, quantum key distribution would be a viable method, a way of us to enter into the technology development phase. And we started off with fiber-based quantum key distribution and implemented the first quantum key distribution link back in 2010. It was a 24-kilometer link during the 2010 FIFA World Cup. And that was to secure the Moses Mabhida Stadium, where the matches was taking place in the main hub. That then naturally and organically inspired us to take the next step and work in free space. And Andrew can tell you a little bit more about their activities in free space with high dimensional states. But on our side, we decided to go work towards satellite links because of a natural collaboration that started off actually with the BRICS collaboration. And that allowed us to implement the first quantum satellite link in South Africa and the Southern Hemisphere. But in terms of where we're going forward, is we really want to see this development of many more links, and not just satellite, but fiber-based links between the cities. When we first implemented this quantum satellite link, we showed for the very first time that you can build portable optical ground stations. And that's one of the aspects that now we would like to deploy across South Africa, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas, to try and develop a quantum network. And that would also incorporate with fiber-based links. But as we said on the onset, we're not working alone. all the different universities are bringing their technology together to eventually build our quantum network. There are universities in South Africa that's focusing more on fiber and others on free space, and then also technology development in terms of detectors. And together, we want to develop this quantum network ecosystem in quantum key distribution amongst the universities.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. And I'm curious to hear, so this sounds like it's been largely focused within like universities actively collaborating. I'm curious if there are any ways in which these somewhat sort of pilot projects are also being collaborated on with potential industry partners. Are there ways to kind of get more of the workforce active in seeing quantum happen firsthand? Because this is real technology in the not in the flesh, because it's not flesh, but in person. And I think a big struggle with quantum is that you can't see it. We don't get to interact with it on a regular basis. So are there opportunities to engage industry and potentially even do like internships for students? I'd love to hear more about that.
I mean, I can say a quick word and then hand over to Isaac. Yeah, we're doing exactly that. So we have got some interns already working with companies. In our original strategy, we tried to go directly to the financial sector, the banks and so on, and get them excited about cryptography and quantum and why you should embrace it. And I think if we were honest with ourselves, it wasn't very successful. And the reason is that banks don't themselves directly invest in cybersecurity. They do it through vendors whom they trust, who are cybersecurity experts. And so now we've started to work with those vendors to say, you know, you're the supplier of the security to those sectors. Let's train you and get you excited about what quantum can do. And that's where we've been placing the interns, and those are the people we've been working with. We have regular workshops to get them on board and literate about quantum. And it's starting to bear fruits, and the true test will be over the next 5 years. But that's our new strategy.
Yeah, I can add to that. And I think what has come out of doing this has been, so for example, I have students who sit at Vodacom, and what we're trying to do is to put them on quantum computing projects, for example, that also aligns with their work. And I mean, we hope that through this we can build collaborations with industry via research projects that we collaborate on through students. Yeah, this has been some of the outcomes.
That's great. That's great. I also think it's really, really interesting to hear that the solution was not to go directly to the banks, but to the vendors. And I find that incredibly interesting. I don't know if everyone who has this vested interest in QKD has really come to that realization yet. And I think this is another thing that when you get a lot of quantum people together, this is something we talk about is, okay, we talk a lot of quantum to other people in quantum, especially at conferences, but how do we engage end users? And then we go to have these conversations with potential companies that could be end users, but it's very difficult to understand who do you talk to within that structure, and how do you do it in a way that actually makes the implementation of the technology feasible? So this idea of going to the vendors is very, very interesting. Okay, so that helps us understand more about the overall ecosystem. So we've heard about academia, we've heard about industry, and we've heard about the involvement in standards. So Conscious, we have roughly about 10 minutes left in our panel. And I'd really love to ask another question that's fundamental to the tour. And that's, what advice would you give based on this experience in South Africa of building this quantum ecosystem? What advice would you give to our next country in the tour, which is Australia?
Australia. Look, Australia is a pretty well-developed country, and who have thrown a lot of money into quantum. And of course, it's been in the news that they've just invested sort of $1 billion Australian into a quantum computing facility in Queensland. So the scale of things is rather different to where we're at. But I think the fundamental problem will be the same, and it's something we've touched on throughout this discussion, and you mentioned at the very beginning. Quantum is never going to succeed if it's going to be driven by physicists. I mean, this realization of the vendors, for instance, these are IT people. They couldn't care how beautiful the story is. They just want to know, is the solution going to work, and is it financially viable, and can it do what it needs to do? I think the trick to success, regardless of where you are, is to empower a community that's wider than your traditional narrow view of who would be driving quantum technologies. And I think if you can get that right, then regardless of your resources, you will see whatever you're trying to do just grow faster. We came to that realization pretty late on. In the early years, we thought we had to do everything, running around, knocking on doors, or trying to develop things. But empowering a community outside our doors to do it has been much more effective.
Thank you.
That, Australia is far ahead of us, but I think in one area that they should focus on is advocacy as well. And we learned from later on after we started this initiative that one of our biggest challenges was advocacy and advocating for quantum technology along all the different sectors. And I think that was where we had to really get, and why we are at the early stages of getting even industry more involved, is we hadn't advocated enough on the start, but now we are advocating, and we're seeing a little bit more of that transition across the ecosystem.
Yeah, and maybe I can add for the younger researchers. I mean, it might look like a very risky research path to take, but the thing is, I mean, there's many open questions in quantum technology and many things that we're still building. The young researchers just mustn't lose hope. And a lot of people might say, yeah, I mean, some of this is hype, but I mean, just like the integrated circuit, when people first developed it, things were bigger than my two hands, or even the computers were larger than the room I'm sitting in. But eventually, as more and more younger people kept on taking the baton and running forward with it, I mean, we got something as small as my phone, right? So yeah, for the younger people, we should just see this as an opportunity to contribute to something bigger. Yeah, which I'm sure Australia is already doing well at. Yeah.
No, thank you all for that. I know it's a much different landscape, but it's really, really interesting to hear these key learnings that you've been able to take from this process, and how can we give that back to the global community so that we can all learn from each other, because this is a very quite unprecedented technology. So thank you again to all of our panelists. I think this has really given quite a good picture of a portrait of South Africa's quantum ecosystem, which is one that's very pragmatic and also deeply human. So with the South African Quantum Technology Initiative acting as this coordinator, but also a unifier to link universities, industries, and disciplines to this very deep focus on realism. So instead of focusing on hype, focusing on focus rather, with finite financial and human capital, identifying metrology, sensing, and imaging as areas where quantum can create immediate value is very important. And I think what really connects our first stop in Malta and the second stop, there's this thread here, which is collaboration. So quantum technology by nature really ignores borders, and this secure network is one where different nations can work together and build these deep partnerships, such as the one between South Africa and China, which is great. So thank you to each of our panelists, and for each of you and your contributions for helping bring quantum technology to life in South Africa. It was great hearing from you. Next, we're going to move to our startup showcase. This one will look a little bit different. So first all, we're going to invite Dr. Christine Steenkamp, and then we'll also hear from Dr. Kessie Govender. So Dr. Steenkamp is a senior lecturer and researcher within the physics department at Stellenbosch University, as well as a scientific advisor for a startup. So Dr. Steenkamp, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
Great. Yes, I've been asked to talk about how my research, which is based on quantum principles, helps me to advise industry and to enable a new industry in South Africa. I want to start with acknowledgements because I'm not doing this on my own. I'm part of a team. And I actually have two entangled projects. And so therefore I have to acknowledge everybody in both of these teams. My project that is more towards basic science is a project where we use trapped ions and we look at novel quantum measurement techniques, and the people who are very significant contributors. It was in the past Herman Eis and currently Thomas Conrad, Mark Tijman, Michael Kastner, and then all the students and postdocs who have been working on it over a few years. The other project, and that is the one we want to focus on today, is on using quantum science for health with industry. And that is for the production of medical isotopes specifically. There I'm working with Pieter Neethling and Erik Rover. Aine Ronander has been instrumental in this development, and also other collaborators and students. And then in this project, we are specifically working with the company ASP Isotopes that is starting a new field of production in South Africa. To discuss my research, I have to start at nuclear medicine. That is the use of low doses of radioactive isotopes. Isotopes are just atoms with specific masses, or the radiation that these isotopes emit for medical diagnosis or treatment. It is a very active research field and also a field where the clinical application is growing fast globally. And that is because it can be used for diagnosis and for treatment of not only cancer, but also cardiovascular diseases, other diseases, and it even has potential for drug-resistant infections. And therefore, there's an increasing global demand for medical radioactive isotopes, and then also for sustainable methods to produce these. So the core of nuclear medicine is a radionuclide or a radioisotope, which is, let me just get a highlight, a laser pointer, which is linked to a binding molecule. That binding molecule is a biological molecule designed to find and link to certain on cells, for example, cancer cells. If this radionuclide is decaying by gamma or positron emission, it can be used for imaging because these gamma rays can be observed by a camera. There are different isotopes that are typically used for it, like technetium and gallium and fluorine, where the numbers behind it is the mass of that isotope. This type of imaging is available in South Africa, not everywhere. And you can see here that the installation of a new PET scanner in the Northwest Province is making headlines and recently made headlines. What is not yet available in South Africa on a commercial basis is the use of radioisotopes for targeted therapy. The nuclide that one uses for therapy must be decaying by beta or alpha emission, emitting a beta or alpha particle, because these particles, when emitted, do damage to tissue, but it's very localized damage in the range of lower than 10 millimeters or even less than a millimeter. And therefore, this can be used to treat tumors without damaging the healthy tissue around that. And examples of these are iodine 131, lutetium 177, and actinium 225 for different types of cancer. So nuclear medicine is a growing and developing field in South Africa. There is clinical studies being pioneered by Prof. Mike Satege at Steve Biko Hospital in South Africa. They are publishing on that topic. radioisotope production is available in South Africa at Itimba, the NRF Itimba Labs facilities, and also at the Nexa facility, and there are private companies also doing the same. A new activity in South Africa that is now led by ASP Isotopes is the sustainable production of the stable isotope precursors. I will come to that, how these things link soon. And that is also where our research is relevant. I'm now going to discuss two examples of two projects where we have been involved that shows how one needs these stable precursors in order to do radioisotope production for medical purposes. So the first example is sustainable production of gallium-68. Now, gallium-68 is needed for medical scans, for PET scans, that is used for diagnosis and for treatment planning of cancer and other diseases. The gallium that you use in that PET scan has a half-life of 1 hour, which means it only lasts for a few hours. It has to be made on the day when it is used for a patient. Gallium-68 is made in a medical cyclotron, which is a machine that converts zinc-68 to gallium-68. Fortunately, this zinc-68 is a stable atom. You can put it in the cupboard and store it until it can be used. But the zinc-68 sample must be very pure. Natural zinc contains several isotopes. Here we have zinc 64, 66, 67, 68, and 70. And only the zinc 68 is useful for this medical application. Actually, the zinc 67, for example, is an unwanted isotope in the medical application, as this has a long decay time, which means that the patient is exposed to more radiation over a long time, which is unwanted. Therefore, the aim of our project with zinc was to selectively ionize and remove zinc 68 from a vapor sample by using resonance laser ionization and polarized lasers and quantum mechanical selection rules. This would not have worked without the quantum mechanical principles. The process that we are using to remove the zinc 67 from a zinc sample is called intermediate state alignment, and we use linear polarized lasers for that. So this picture is just there to show you that if we have zinc 67 in its ground state, and we expose that atom to 3 different lasers at the same time, we can let the atom run up an energy ladder, and when it gets to the top, it is ionized. It gets a positive charge. And once an atom has a positive charge, we have a handle on it, we can pull it out by means of electric fields, and we can remove it from the sample. The reason why we can do this selectively is because for the even mass zinc, so 64, 66, 68, and 70, there is a quantum principle, and specifically it's the principle that angular momentum must be conserved and that angular momentum is quantized. Those principles block the ladder for the even isotopes, meaning that these isotopes will not be ionized when zinc 67 is ionized. So we wanted to show this principle in practice in the experiment, but we were working against the odds in our laboratory. We had broadband lasers, which means they are not really very selective in terms of frequency. We had an external magnetic field present. There was also a delay between the first and the second laser, and that means that in this excited state, there can be some precession of the angular momentum, which spoils your selectivity. But we had this hypothesis that if one could optimize the angle of between the polarizations of the different lasers, one can still do it. So our experiment worked this way. Laser beams interact with a sample of atomic vapor. There it ionizes the atoms. Here I have 2 colors showing you ions of different masses. Those ions are extracted by means of an electric field, and you see that they arrive at the detector at different times based on their masses. And in other words, what this experiment gives out is a mass spectrum. And here is our highlight mass spectrum, where you can see that the only zinc-67 has a significant signal. The other isotopes, I've indicated their positions where their peaks would have been, are not present in this sample. That means that we have actually taken a natural sample where zinc-67 is present at 4% and turned it into a sample where zinc-67 is 90%, which means we have extracted selectively the zinc-67 from the sample. The second method or project that I would like to highlight is sustainable production for lutetium-177. And this is the project that we are doing together with ASP Isotopes, or that where we are advising ASP Isotopes, who is upscaling this for real commercial production. The reason for the project is exactly the same. We need lutetium-177 for cancer therapy. Lutetium-177 is produced by starting with ytterbium-177 and converting that to you start with 176, convert it to 177, but that decays rapidly in lutetium-177. So what we need to start this process is a highly enriched sample containing ytterbium-176 and not all the other natural isotopes of ytterbium that are present in it. So in this case, our aim is to extract the ytterbium-176 from the sample, not to remove it, but actually to keep it and to use that for the medical application. We need a purity or a selectivity of 97%, which is very high. And in addition, we need to optimize this process for a reasonable yield, because this has to go into a production setup. So the commercial production of ytterbium-176 is portrayed here on the website of ASP Isotopes. This is just the artist representation, but you can see we are using the same method that we have been using for the zinc. The atoms come in, they interact with the laser ionizes the ytterbium-176, the other isotopes are continuing, whereas the 176 is extracted in order to form the medical sample. In this project, I can't give you a lot of technical detail, as that is obviously proprietary information, but I can show you what people in industry, in the literature say about this process. And that is that the requirements for a commercial process is obviously a high yield, high selectivity, as I said, 97%, and robust operation. And this is a challenge to get. This sketch here shows you from literature how people envisage this process, where you have a crucible where the metal vapor is evaporated. The metal vapor interacts here in the yellow region with the lasers. The red dots are the ions that have been formed by the lasers, and they are extracted by means of an electric field to fall onto an ion collector plate, where they will then be collected from in order to get the medical sample. So you have several things that you have to optimize here. There are all the laser parameters. There is the depletion of the laser in the vapor. There's the vapor handling and everything you have to do to avoid the vapor from actually ending up on the ion collector and in that way contaminating the sample. There are several of these parameters where you really have to make a compromise, because, for example, in the vapor density, a low density means low production, but a too high density means contamination. And the same thing with the extraction fields, where you also have to make a compromise between small field, high field, and each has their ups and downs. So I want to conclude by sharing a few things that I've learned from this process of being a scientist, but now advising industry who really wants to produce a product. Firstly, it is really an exciting process. It gives purpose to my research, to know that I'm working on a real life problem and that one is pushing the limits. We are not producing new physics here, but we are applying physics and other principles to a real problem, and that is really where the challenge then lies. So what makes it challenging is that it is really interdisciplinary. one has to learn the language to talk to people who are in business and who are in engineering and who don't understand the terms that I would use in science. There's obviously the confidentiality scenario where we can't consult outside the project. In academia, we are used to consulting widely, but here we can't always. There's time limitations and pressure, and sometimes one has to live with uncertainty and with projections that you have to make, even if you don't have data yet. The lessons learned is that experience is really valuable. I started working on these projects already in 2015, and only last year the industrial application really became a reality. But that was good, because having worked in this field myself, having that experience is very, very valuable. And then communication is crucial. That has also now been mentioned in other contexts, but within and between teams, we have people with many different roles in such a
I think we lost that momentarily. Christine,
Yes.
really loved this last slide, especially. I feel like you've really captured what's difficult about quantum, but also what's important as we think about how do we apply this to real world problems. So it's important to link quantum to potential, like how it has the potential to impact people's lives, but it can be very, very challenging because it does require so much interdisciplinary expertise. But I did want to ask one question before we move on, and that's for those listeners who may not be within the medical domain and may not quite understand. When it comes to improving the production of medical isotopes, what does that mean for patients and for public health? What is the potential there?
I really hope that will mean that in South Africa, these medical, both diagnostics, but also treatment will become more generally available. So at the moment, we have medical scanning, but only in the big centers and only maybe one in a province. So it means that people who need it doesn't always have the access to that. And then it just means that their disease remains undiagnosed, and they end up in an advanced stage of the disease where they could have had help earlier on. And then the second thing is that there is now treatment modalities being developed for things like prostate cancer, for endocrine cancer, cancers that are very difficult to treat, but it's not available in South Africa. And we will probably not have it available in South Africa unless we can make those radioisotopes ourselves, because as you have seen, these things have short lives. You can't make them in the United States and export them to South Africa. That is very limited. So my real hope is that this work will lead to making really quality medical treatment available to South Africans in our country.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I'm really glad you shared that, because I think that this is relevant in so many different places in the world. So the potential, and this is why people, I think, get so excited about quantum, those of us who are in it, because the potential impact is so large. I know here in the States, I happen to be in a state that has a lot of rural areas, a lot of places that actually go without medical treatment. And we see this same sort of challenge. So very, very exciting. Thank you so much for taking the time to present your work and show just how quantum can have significant impact on our lives. And so that being said, I'd love to now welcome Dr. Kessie Govender for you to share your presentation as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Sierra. I'm going to try and share again. Let's try share a window. Tammy, do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this session. I'm just going to put a pointer here. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit more differently. I'm going to be giving a more ground level talk.
Sorry, Cassie. I'm sorry to intervene. It's showing right now the PowerPoint screen. Would you be able to share the presentation view?
Geez, how do I? I'm actually in my presentation view in here. Is that still not showing as a presentation?
Not yet.
And now?
No, it's still showing PowerPoint. Are you able to share a specific frame instead of the whole screen?
Okay, let me just try that again. I'm going to stop sharing and sorry, can you see that now? Sorry, I'm sorry to be taking up time here.
No, it's okay. It's still sharing the list of slides in PowerPoint.
Now?
No, still the same. Would you be able to send the slides to Jillian and she can share the presentation?
Okay, I'm going to email it to her if you don't mind. If you don't mind, maybe you can move on to the next speaker.
Oh, no problem. We will just
I'm going to
pause.
send it to Jillian.
Perfect. And then if you want to go ahead and start your introduction, she will start.
Just one moment here. Okay, I've sent it to Jillian. This, if she
Perfect.
could, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So if you stop sharing, and then Jillian will work on getting those slides up, and then we can go ahead and get started on the introduction.
Sorry, my apologies.
No.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay. Okay, as I said, I'm going to be speaking slightly differently from what most people have been speaking. And as Yaseera has introduced me, I'm Dr. Casey Govender, and I work at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. And I'm a physicist as well as an engineer. So I've got a training in both physics and engineering. And that makes me unique in many ways because I can talk both languages. And I joined the university in my present university, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, in 2013. And I decided to start a quantum group there. And I've had a passion for a specific area of work. And if I'm just waiting for Jillian to actually share my presentation. And I'm going to be speaking on a specific project and how I actually started this group up and the challenges that I had in terms of getting this project off the ground. In 2013 quantum was still in its initial phase there. and nobody was wanting to give me money. And I'm a very resourceful person, and you just have to make a plan and become resourceful and find ways to getting things done. And I applied for funding to various organizations, and the funders came back and said, the candidate has got no experience, the project's going to fail. But I know my character, and I know that I've got the skills to actually make things happen. So I went about being resourceful, and I managed to actually get this project off the ground. Gillian, if you could go back one slide. Okay, my talk is going to have the following overview. I'm going to talk about the timelines on setting up this lab that I created, and the challenges that I had, and how we actually got to the stage we are at the moment. Then I'm going to give an overview of this lab that I actually developed, which is basically, and it employs quantum principles in order to work. And in developing this laboratory, we had to actually make a lot of our equipment ourselves because we didn't have money to buy them. And we developed a lot of products there. And these products now, I'm taking it to another level, into a commercialization phase. So Gillian, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, you probably heard a lot of quantum technology presentations so far, and there are various platforms on which one could develop quantum technologies. You've got an optical or photonic system, or you can have a quantum system based on trapped ions, or you can have a system based on trapped neutral atoms, which is what I've chosen. Then there's other option of using solid state material like diamond and silicon, and superconducting devices like the Josephson junction, etc. So the reason I chose trapped neutral atoms is that it gives me a freedom to investigate a lot of things. I mean, the end goal is one thing, but the journey getting to the end goal is also important. And we've learned a lot of things on the path to actually developing the neutral atom traps here. And that is principally why I've chosen neutral atoms. And then I can go into atomic physics, I can go into quantum computing, or I can go into developing quantum sensors. So the idea was to develop a laboratory as a platform in which various researchers from everywhere across the world could come to our lab and say, we've got an algorithm that they want to try out, and we could simply implement it in our laboratory. So given that, let's go to the next slide. So as I said, I started at CPUT in 2013. And after settling down for a while, then I started applying for funding in 2015. So most of 2014, 2015 was the application of funding, trying to recruit students and advertising to various people in our department in the university, trying to encourage staff members to join. And as I've indicated, I mean, in the beginning, nobody wanted to give us money. So we said, let's make a plan and build some of the stuff ourselves. So we didn't have all the optical equipment and all the mechanical items needed to hold optical elements. So I simply went to an aluminum shop and bought a whole lot of aluminum, and we went to mechanical engineering, and we actually had people from mechanical engineering machine some of these parts for us. We didn't even have an optical table to work with. We just bought a large sheet of aluminum, drilled holes in them, tapped them, and that's a picture that you see at the top right-hand corner. And our first experiment was basically done using homemade parts. And then 2016 to 2017, we spent a lot of time building the vacuum system. I'll speak a little bit about why we need a vacuum system. All the electronic equipment that we needed, we spent a year or two working on that. In 2017 and 2018, by the end of 2017, we've actually got most of the bulk of the work done. In terms of building up the system, but we struggled to actually get the actual old cold machine to work, to cool atoms down. So 2017, 2018, we worked flat out, just me and mostly two of my students. And sometime around 2015, the picture that you see there is sort of what the group looked like. It's just changed drastically now. Some of them have graduated, and some of them, two of them are still with me, two doctoral students. And at the end of 2018, around about on the 4th of October, we managed to get cold atoms. We managed to use lasers to cool atoms down to an unbelievable temperature of 17 microkelvins. Generally, the public works in degrees Celsius. I know the people in the United States uses Fahrenheit, but just to give you a feel for what is 17 microkelvin. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, and then 100 degrees Celsius in terms of the Kelvin scale is 373 degrees Kelvin. Water freezes around 0 degrees, which is 273 degrees Kelvin. Liquid nitrogen is 77 degrees 77 degrees Kelvin, which is minus 95 degrees Celsius. And there you've got absolute 0 Kelvin, where nothing can be lower than 0 Kelvin. And that in terms of Celsius, that's minus 273 degrees Celsius. And liquid helium is approximately 4 Kelvin. And you can see 17 Kelvin is just slightly above 0. So it's an extremely low temperature. Now, what is the reason for this low temperature is that we need these low temperatures in order to bring out the quantum properties of the cold atoms. If the temperature of the atoms is too high, it just the thermal vibration, the thermal background simply swamps the quantum properties, and you cannot really use them. And once you've got atoms in that cold state, then you can start trapping them. You can start doing all sorts of fancy things with them, which is basically a kind of our next goal. So if I could go to the next slide. So yeah, then we had 2020 when COVID kicked in. So we worked for the next 3 years, mostly working from home. That's where I actually built one of the items that I'm going to talk about a little later on, entirely in my bedroom, in fact. And it's now one of the items we use in our laboratory. And around about 2023, the picture that you see on the right-hand side is what the picture of the lab looks like. I'll show a bigger picture in a moment. And then from 2023 to the present, we've just been revising the products that we've developed to actually implement this cold atoms machine. And my goal now from going forward is actually spending most of my time now in commercialization activities and planning a spin-off company that I'm working towards. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, I'm just going to talk briefly about this machine that we've actually built to actually cool atoms down. There's a little bit of science involved here. So I'm going to explain it in one dimension here. So in order to cool atoms down, if you look at this, we've got a cloud of atoms sitting somewhere in the middle there. They're moving to the left with the velocity v, say. And we have a pair of counter-propagating beams striking the atoms. The atoms, the laser is tuned to a certain frequency, and the atoms are moving towards the left laser beam, and then they'll absorb photons from that beam. And remember, photons are like little particles, and when these atoms absorb these particles, they get a kick in the opposite direction that kind of like slows them down. So that'll eventually bring the atoms down to 0 velocity. And if the atoms are moving to the right, then they'll be absorbing photons from the right laser beam. So eventually the atoms will eventually come to almost a standstill, but they'll be distributed all over the place. Then we have a set of magnetic coils, electric coils, got electric currents flowing through those coils, then it becomes like a magnet. And those magnetic coils tends to push these atoms towards the middle of the area, and they all collect in a cloud. The top picture on the right-hand side there is a picture of this. To do this experiment now, we have to do it in a vacuum system. And the vacuum pressure has got to be extremely low, something very similar to what you'd get out in outer space, 10 to the minus 11 millibars. Remember, 1 bar is atmospheric pressure. 1 millibar is 1,000th of the atmospheric pressure. 10 to the minus 11 millibars is 10 to the minus 14 atmospheric pressure. That's 0.0000014 zeros, 1 times 10 times atmospheric pressure. Now you can imagine how low how low that pressure is. So we need that kind of vacuum in order to avoid background gases from knocking the atoms out of the cloud. And to get this whole machine to work, there's a whole lot of parameters that we need to actually set. The laser has got to be set to the right frequency. The vacuum pressure has got to be at the right level. The magnetic fields has got to be at the right level. The spacings between the magnetic coils has got to be carefully adjusted. After managing to iron out all these little problems, we managed to get the cloud. And in the bottom picture that you see here, you see a growth of cloud starting from the top left-hand frame there, going from left to right, and then from top to bottom. And you can see as we start the mission off, there's a growth in the cloud. And the cloud in the end is roughly about 3 millimeters in diameter, and usually contains something like 10 to the 8 or 10 to the 9 atoms there. But it may look like a lot of atoms there, but it's actually quite low. You cannot actually see this with your naked eye, so you have to use a camera that's got a broad spectral response to actually view the image there. We could go to the next slide, which shows you the picture of the laboratory. So this is what the lab looks like. And in the back optical table there is where the cooling is done, and the chamber that I just showed you in the previous slide is at the back right-hand corner. And you can see here you've got a instrument shelf that containing a lot of the instruments. Some of the instruments were actually home built, and you can see just by looking at the stuff on the table, you can see it's a lot of homemade stuff there. A lot of optomechanics, long rods that we actually had machined out using a lathe. And in the foreground, you can see computers where we actually image the cloud using cameras. You can't see the cameras on the optical table, but we've got two cameras that are used to view the cloud. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, that's the previous slide was the previous few slides I've explained this whole machine that we have actually built, and as I've indicated earlier on, in order to get this machine working, I had to be resourceful and make a plan. And if we didn't have money to buy equipment, we just knuckled down and actually started to build the stuff in our lab. And we've built a number of products. So these products are not quantum products, but they support quantum research. And you see here on the left-hand side here is a typical commercial product, which is a photo detector from a company called Thor Labs. Typically, it's about $400. And in the bottom two pictures is our homemade version of it. It's showing you the actual printed circuit board. Eventually, we're going to have it packaged, and that costs in the order of about $100, right? So it's a factor of 4 savings there. The top right-hand picture here is a picture of an instrument that we've developed around 2018 with me and my student. It's an instrument to actually characterize entanglement between photons, right? And then we're going to take that instrument and upgrade that to go through another revision of improvements to this. If you go to the next slide, Gillian, you'll see that on the top right-hand corner is that coincident counting unit being repackaged. It's been added a few new items to it. The bottom left-hand corner is one of the lasers that I've actually built, that I mentioned that I started this during the COVID years. And it's a second revision of what I built in my bedroom at that time. And I'm actually in the process of actually doing a third revision. I've actually, it's my third revision is actually a completely new rework of that. And so these are the products that I've shown you. Are not all of them, but it's a fair amount of the products that we've developed in developing our lab. And the next slide is basically a technical side. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it just goes into the workings of the laser. Gillian, if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, as I said, I'm not going to go into the details here, but this slide shows you the internal work construction of the laser, just the laser head of it. And in the bottom right picture is the very first model of it. It's a handmade model of what the laser head looks like. And in the top drawings is basically schematics of various parts within the laser head. And I think that basically brings me to the end of the presentation. If I could go to the next slide, which is basically the acknowledgements. So I've received funding from various peoples, the Faculty of Engineering and the Research Office at the Cape Peninsula University, our South African National Research Foundation, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the Photonics Center, and obviously I cannot forget to mention the South African Quantum Initiative. And that's my talk, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kessie. I did want to call out, I really enjoyed this. I think you've quite accurately distilled the essence of entrepreneurship. How do you make something out of nothing? How do you solve problems with what you have at hand? And how do you refuse to let constraints limit you? And I really, really love the story of facing early doubt in your capabilities, having to deal with that. But your response was, I'm going to find an aluminum shop and I'm just going to build an optical table by drilling holes into aluminum. And I think that's really incredible. So really important for all of our listeners to hear, especially when I think of the workforce and people that we really want to empower to go out and find solutions in quantum technology. And I did want to ask you one question. You said something earlier about one of your strengths being able to speak the languages of both the scientists or the physicists and the engineers. So when we think about the makeup of quantum startups, the translation is really everything. So these teams have to bring together people who think about the world in terms of equations and those who think about it in terms of building components. So from your own experience, what have you learned about those two mindsets, and what works when you're trying to bring together physicists and engineers in a business team?
Actually, that was one of the reasons why, I used to work for a physics department back before I joined the present university, and that was at University of KwaZulu-Natal, up the east coast of South Africa. And then I joined the engineering department specifically to get engineers involved in it. But I did find it actually quite a challenge actually to get engineers on board, because I'm not sure about internationally what the situation is, but in South Africa, the engineering departments they do not teach a lot of quantum physics. And because of that, I found that the engineers are a little bit reluctant to get involved in it because they don't have the background. And engineering departments have been slowly cutting physics out of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to come to their detriment here. But even in our own department here, back at CPUT, even up till now, I do struggle to actually get the engineers actually to come on board. And, whoever I've managed to actually recruit into my group, I've actually, when I started working at the university, in order to bring them up to speed, I actually used to run separate like lectures to these people, and so my students, when they started in my group, I had about 5 students who had no physics training at all. And I sat for 3 years and gave them like a classroom style. We gave them classes, and I took them from first year physics all the way to quantum physics at the honors level. And in the last few years, I've introduced physics and I've introduced quantum physics to the engineers. And whether it carries on and stays there, I'm not sure, because my time at CPT has come to an end. So I'm actually, at the end of this month here is going to be my last day here, and I'm going to be working on my spin-off company with developing these products that I've actually mentioned. So I mean, I've done whatever I could to get the engineers on board. It's up to them to take it and run with it.
Oh, that's awesome. Love to hear that you're going to be putting more time into your spin out to have this start to build that industry in South Africa. And I completely agree that separating engineering and physics is really to the detriment. So my My bachelor's efforts were focused on, my degree at the time was engineering physics. And I really loved the program because it brought together, one, learning the foundations of physics from a physicist's perspective and quantum mechanics, but also they included computer science, and then they also let you pick a focus in engineering. And so it was really this comprehensive overall curriculum that I think is really invaluable. But that's really great. And Dr. Steenkamp, Dr. Govender, we're out of time. We have to move to the next section. But before we do, I really wanted to give each of you a chance to answer briefly 2 questions for me, which is 1, what do you want quantum to do for South Africa? And 2, what advice do you have for the next stop on the world tour?
Okay, since I'm already alive here, so for me, I would say, from a South African perspective, I think Andrew and Yaseera sort of captured that earlier on, is to provide employment and provide contribute to the economy in this country. And I think that's, for me, that's my goal now, I'm not doing it to become like one of these Bill Gates or Elon Musk kind of person. Like I'm a ground level person, and I want to do it simply to provide employment and contribute to the economy. So that's what I'm looking for, what quantum should do for the country.
Yeah, thank you. And from my side, I would like to see that we don't, as a separate topic, that we integrate the quantum world with the rest of experimental physics, with engineering, because that is where I see where the challenge, where we can meet the challenges. So there are people who are very exclusive about quantum, where they won't even actually include my work as quantum, but I think we need to take the full spectrum. The one side of the spectrum is where you really have a quantum advantage, but there is then a whole range of applications ending up at applications. And you can't always say, I only want to work in a certain field. I think we must bring together the talents and the insights from different fields in order to solve real world problems.
Well, that's a great, thank you both. I think that this has been an incredible segment. I loved just this antithesis of, one, the focus on real world problems, so production of medical isotopes, which I think is very powerful, and then also what it takes to have a startup mindset, a resilient mindset, in order to drive the technology forward. So thank you both again. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your research with us, and look forward to seeing what you do in the future. And with that, we will move to the next segment, which will be our panel on workforce development. This will be our final panel of the session, and we're going to focus on the people who make any ecosystem possible, which is the workforce. So we'll explore both the current and future state of quantum skills, workforce development, and also talent pipelines in South Africa. And I'm very excited to welcome our 2 panelists. So Dr. Yaseera Ismail will rejoin us, and she will also speak alongside Dr. Kelvin Mpofu, who is a senior researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research and a leader within the South African Quantum Technology Initiative. So welcome to both of you. There you are. And before we get started, Kelvin, you've had a bit of a head start, because you've already heard my first question for you. What do you want to do for your country?
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for the invite. I think my answer is very similar to the answers that Yaseera, Andrew, Isaac, Kisi provided. I think the hope is that we can use quantum resources to benefit our economy, and maybe, hopefully, solve certain problems that we have. If use quantum resources to develop new avenues to solve some local problems that we have here in South Africa. Yeah, that's that's my hope for quantum in South Africa.
Fantastic. I love that. And then, Yaseera, we heard from you in the first segment. So I'd love to jump into how, first of all, how are South African universities integrating quantum science and engineering into their curriculum to prepare the next generation?
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so South Africa, the core universities in South Africa do have already a strong quantum mechanics curriculum in their undergraduate degrees. But what we're seeing now is, and I can speak for Stellenbosch, for example, we have at honors level a strong quantum curricula as well. We have a quantum optics course at honors level. We have an advanced quantum technology course and a quantum computing course. But I'd like to highlight the quantum computing course, and the reason why is we just heard about how hard it is to bring engineers and other people from other disciplines, students from other disciplines, to engage more with quantum. And the quantum computing course is not open to only physics honors students, but also computer science honors students. And this course then makes it a key course to get students from other disciplines to become more involved and engaging with curricula at the quantum level, and specifically with quantum technology. And that course has been very useful. And what we should see is that more and more of these courses span out to other universities, or we create a national program where we have quantum technology courses where university students from all different universities can take the courses at a specific university and engage more with quantum technology. But we do have currently these courses taking place at honors level.
That's wonderful. I think it's so important that we start to integrate this into curriculum quite heavily. And so I love to hear any efforts related to that. Kelvin, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I do have a follow-up question for you, Yaseera.
I think Yaseera pretty much covered it. We really have like great a great quantum mechanics course. We have great quantum mechanics courses in the physics department at university levels. Like, for instance, I was doing in 2015, we were already getting taught quantum computing. We had quantum computing modules at UKZN, quantum cryptography modules. So it's quite great. But bringing in, it's been a bit of a challenge to bring in people from other departments into these courses. Yeah.
No, that's a great point.
That's
This is, and I think someone, it was Dr. Christine, she highlighted it earlier that one of the challenges is how interdisciplinary the development of the technology needs to be. And so it's important to bring in people from other departments. Yaseera, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier that something you were very passionate about is making sure that people understood that quantum is for everyone. It's not just for researchers, it's not just for academia. And so I'd love to hear, beyond university level programs, are there local initiatives that bring quantum concepts into secondary education, vocational training, or even just community-based initiatives? For instance, I've heard of countries that have museums dedicated to quantum, which I think is really neat. So I'd love to hear your perspective on, do these things exist? And if not, what would you love to see?
Yeah, that's a good follow on. And actually, I'm very passionate about this, and that's why I'm also involved in quite a few of these. I can tell you that I recently gave a science cafe in a rural setting, and which was very informative for me, because what I got was a lot of feedback from the general public. And we're also hosting one next week at Forbes in Stellenbosch, Science Cafe, where we're going to be speaking about the quantum satellite link to the public. We also do a lot of public engagement outside of the university, for example, at Rotary, where you get a lot of community leaders that come to Rotary that may be part of industry or corporate, but doesn't have any quantum background. And that has been also very beneficial to build on collaborations. Another initiative I would really love to mention, and this is SAQT as well as NITEX partnered with recently Jive Media, Jive Media is a South African agency which basically specializes on science communication, and they make scientific topics relatable to school learners. And they recently, through this partnership, did a special edition on quantum. And it's not just giving students concepts, but making it fun and relatable through crossword puzzles and other means of getting the information across. It also featured a lot of the speakers that you have on board today. So it was a nice way to get quantum to the public. It was a newspaper, which is then, it's called Science Bazaar. It's delivered to school learners of various age groups. And that was quite a nice initiative. Universities are constantly performing outreach across South Africa to show demos to students, as well as public talk. So we do a lot more science engagement, and we really try to make quantum as relatable as possible to school learners. So I am passionate about it. We also have mentorship programs where we try to bring the students, school learners, into our research labs to give them a chance to actually just see some of the technology. And I really think this is pivotal because, besides just taking the concepts to them, showing them the actual deployment or the practicality of these concepts is actually how we're going to influence the next generation of scientists.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I'm so excited to hear that. I love that you mentioned the Science Cafe. You were able to talk about the quantum satellite link and again, bringing them into the research labs, because the difficulty again with quantum is we don't get to see it every day. And so being able to show them the tangible output, I think is really, really important so they can assimilate it into their reality. It's very exciting to hear. And I also wanted to kind of jump back a step really quick. Kelvin, you mentioned again, this difficulty in bringing other departments into the curriculum. And so a question for you, and also both of you, if you'd like to comment, how do you think South Africa as a whole, at any level, can start to have training that spans across disciplines so that you develop both the technical specialists as well as the cross-domain professionals? What steps can we take?
Can I go first, Yaseera, or okay? I think from my own personal experience, some of the hesitation really comes from people not really knowing what problems quantum systems solve, or at times some people do know, but they feel like maybe there's a bit of a lack of patience to some extent to say, if I can do it classically, why would I even consider doing it quantum mechanically? And I think maybe the first step in my mind is just to demonstrate small problems where people can start to appreciate, the advantage, or small problems where we can demonstrate some type of usefulness. At least, I don't necessarily know if we can always demonstrate an advantage, but at least the usefulness of quantum resources. I think that would sort of engage more people and make quantum resources attractive. Say, if we, for example, a simple example would be if we demonstrated the use of quantum resources, maybe in the quantum metrology space, in a healthcare-based problem, that could suck in maybe a few people from the health sector and encourage them to come in, to start interacting or engaging with the quantum space. Or even if we can show some optimization problems that are relevant, maybe that could draw in some mathematics, some computer science people into the quantum computing space as well. So in my mind, I think just demonstrating solutions to some of the problems that people have can really draw them in. Thanks.
I can add to that. Something that really works well is the hosting of our weekly mini schools. I think that has really brought in a lot of students from different disciplines, and it always focuses on some quantum related topic. It's either a lecture that lasts a session for a week or over a few weeks, but an hour session, which was quite helpful. We have a lot of spring schools and summer schools that also drive in students from various disciplines. And that's always caters to also hands-on approaches, which has also worked very well in the past. But something that I would like to see going forward is, why do we have to only focus on universities? We have an untapped TVET colleges where we can look at quantum technician courses, mini courses, as trying to build up a quantum technician. And that's an untapped resource, which we really don't focus on. But, TVETs is also an approach. It doesn't have to be a complete formal university education. Someone has to train someone to work on these technologies. And TVETs is an untapped resource.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your answers. Kelvin, you summed it up really nicely. It's all about how do we demonstrate solutions to pull in other potential stakeholders in quantum. And so it really comes back to the same approach for K through 12, or for getting the general public involved is the same for other disciplines, which is making it hands-on, making it visible, showing the potential impact. And I also loved, Yaseera, you mentioned how do we tap into the potential of the technician? And this is something we actually saw here in the US. There was a program that realized they didn't have a lot of PhDs, but they did have a lot of technicians. And so how do we start teaching them quantum concepts? So I really love that you touched on this. I love that there are these mini schools. I think that's really great. So before we end this segment, unfortunately, this went by so fast, as it always does. But Kelvin, I wanted to ask you, what is your advice for the next country on the tour? What key learning do you want to offer them?
That's an interesting question. That's Australia, right?
Yes, it's Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe my advice to them would be to collaborate as much as possible with maybe less developing countries like South Africa, for instance. And I think we really have a community that is capable of offering a lot, and that can do a lot with very little. You may have heard Kesey built an entire project from his bedroom. So yeah, my advice would be, please collaborate with developing countries, let's work together to make quantum a reality. And yeah, that's my advice. Thanks.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you both so much. And thank you to all of our participants today. Before we end, I wanted to do a quick wrap up of what we heard, because I think that this is really invaluable knowledge share and really why we wanted to pursue this project in the first place. So it's very clear that the overall journey for South Africa is really straying from the hype of quantum and focusing on how does it provide practical, tangible outcomes that benefit society. I especially loved this focus on how it contributes to the quantum economy. I know this is something Professor Forbes mentioned, as well as Kesey in his presentation, is this need to want to pursue quantum, not for Bill Gates status, as Dr. Govinder mentioned, but for the pursuit of building the quantum economy in South Africa and providing opportunities for those that didn't have it before. And so this was really clear patterns of pragmatism, of inclusion, of ingenuity, and really love to hear about the different programs such as the Science Cafe that are bringing in the larger community and really promoting quantum literacy. And so before we wrap, Jillian, if you want to share the screen, coming back to this theme of quantum literacy really quick, I wanted to share that this past July, both the ITU and Quantum Delta in the Netherlands launched the International Quantum Course. So this is a free multilingual program that is designed to make quantum accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. And it's a really great reminder that the future of this field depends on not just those who build the hardware, but on those who understand it. And I think this really embodies the same spirit that defines the South Africa's journey, which is this commitment to openness, to inclusion. And as Yaseera mentioned, that quantum is for everyone. It's not just for universities. So thank you all again. It's been an incredible session, and we look forward to speaking again soon, and also seeing all of the contributions that you will all have over the course of the next several years.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.